Boston Latin School is the oldest high school in America. It's a symbol of how Boston Public Schools, the oldest public school system in the country, has often set the pace for education nationwide. That includes how high schools think about college prep and job readiness. Now, BPS is stepping into a whole new frontier, developing a curriculum that could make it one of the first major districts to teach every student how to understand and use artificial intelligence. Now, as much as Boston sets the standard, it also reflects the nation. Like many districts across the country, BPS now has a majority BIPOC student body, and yet outcomes aren't keeping up with the promises of its programming. And that raises a bigger question about what AI means for all students. It's true that AI is expected to automate parts of many blue-collar and white-collar jobs, but labor analysts say it may also increase demand for skilled technical and trade work that's tied to the data centers, energy systems, and AI infrastructure posing a threat to Black and brown communities. Reports from CompTIA, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and McKinsey suggest the technology is more likely to transform jobs than eliminate them altogether. But researchers warn that Black and Latino workers remain underrepresented in tech and AI-related industries, even as companies increasingly use automated systems in hiring, education, policing, and public services. Investigations by ProPublica and researchers studying algorithmic bias have found those systems can reproduce existing racial inequities, raising new questions about who benefits, who gets left behind, and how Black and brown communities are being tracked, evaluated, and surveilled in the AI era. So even as access to this new technology is made equal, that doesn't mean the benefits will be. And it's a story we know all too well. So as Boston and the nation builds AI literacy for the next generation, what does it mean to prepare a future BIPOC workforce for technologies that can both open new doors and eliminate jobs as we know them? We know the problem. Now let's get to the root of it. I'm Paris Alston, and this is Rooted. With so much development around AI, we're unpacking what AI literacy means for America's future Black and brown workforce.
This is a question, in my view, of economic survival. If you do not have these skills, I do not know how you economically survive.
That's Chike Agu, former Chief Innovation Officer at the Department of Labor.
It's not clear to me that U.S. education is set up well to make people, in general, more creative.
And that's Harvard labor economist Kadeem Norey, whose research covers hiring equality and talent selection. Together, they'll unpack what AI literacy and so-called blue-collar tech could mean for the Black and brown children whose futures will be defined by it. Chike, we've been hearing a lot about AI literacy programs coming to school districts. What are they, and what are the problems that they're trying to solve?
The problem that they're trying to solve, I think, is this. We all know that, and we are hearing and we're seeing that this is the next big general purpose technology, akin to the internet, and even akin to telephony and enterprise softwares like Excel. And the question is, how do we make sure that every child and student is prepared for that? One, because we know it'll have an impact on how they perform in the market. Secondly, we know it's going to have an impact on their own social mobility to get to where they want to go in their lives. And thirdly, we know it's what the economy needs. That's what I think we're trying to solve. I think the big question is, how do we do that in ways that make sure that people learn to become masters of the technology and don't let the technologies become master of them? I think that's what we're really trying to figure out in this space. And so it's why the way that we tackle AI literacy is so important, not just for students themselves while they're students, but for when they become workers and employees and employers and leaders within the economy and in our broader society.
And Kadeem, how would you quantify AI literacy in predominantly Black areas right now?
There's something that I think is not necessarily intuitive to people who are using these tools. And it comes down to this concept of what's called desirable difficulties in education. So when you think about actually trying to take in new skills, oftentimes people's intuition leads them to think that things that are the easiest, fastest ways of getting easy to read information about a topic is the way to learn information about that topic. But in reality, there are a number of studies in the learning sciences that suggest that having to struggle to go through and read through, recollect information is actually the way to encode information in your head so that you know it. And yet, when people are given options to do study techniques that are harder, things like trying to recall things from their notes instead of going directly to their notes, things like this, when people are given options to do these things that are harder, that work better, they oftentimes do not realize that that is the way to ultimately learn things. And so when I think about AI literacy, I think one of the big challenges is that people might have the feeling that they are using these tools in ways that are increasing their knowledge, but by using them in ways that make it easier to get information, they actually might be depriving themselves.
And I just want to say one thing is I think that's actually really important. And again, it kind of goes to this whole, how do you make sure you're a master of the technology and not the other way around? It's one of the things that is important to know about AI literacy, or that people are trying to teach through AI literacy, is what are the limitations of these technologies? You'll hear about AI hallucinations, and generally, even if you open up a Claude or a ChatGPT or a Gemini, it tells you the human needs to check what comes out of this. And so how do we make sure that human beings are in a place to check it, oversee it, and not just trust it? When I was in the Biden administration, and we were thinking about the use of machine learning and AI around things like Medicaid, around things like unemployment insurance, we would have this phrase called human in the loop. And so the question is, how do we make sure that the human in the loop for that final decision that an AI may be part of either today or one day actually can do their job, which is to make sure that the outcome that you want out of this actually is what you get. And I think to what you hear my colleague from HBS really hinting at is, if you too early outsource either the thinking or the understandings on a particular domain to the AI, you can't actually be the human in the loop. You can't be the human who actually checks it on the back end. And we have to start teaching those things and those capacities to students, frankly, as early as possible.
I understand the benefit of giving students these tools early on, but are we training them to think in a less critical way if they're engaging with the AI in this way?
So thinking about introducing it at younger and younger ages, the thing that I worry about is that it's actually hard to figure out clean ways of monitoring how students are using these technologies. And so knowing whether or not they're developing these skills is actually quite difficult. So if somebody actually goes home, let's say we're talking, middle school education, someone's given a math assignment and they have a personal laptop at home and they have access to ChatGPT, for example. It's actually quite difficult to know what it would look like to be able to monitor the usage that they have at home. Is the stuff that they're producing actually stuff that comes from directly their own mind? That's something that maybe partnering with parents would be important to understand. But I think that the key thing that is going to make this problem easier to navigate is that students, as early as possible, are going to need to know what they are potentially giving up in terms of long-term consequences. If it's the case that they use things in improper ways, they're actually going to need to be empowered to know how to improve the outcomes for themselves, instead of it sort of coming in a more top-down fashion from teachers due to the inability to sort of observe these individual activities. What it looks like to do that, I mean, I'm not a K through 12 educator. I'm grateful that I'm not in this moment, but speculating a little.
But yeah, Chike, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, someone who started my career as a K-12 educator, I taught second grade in Brooklyn, New York at the beginning of my career. One of the things that AI has confounded and made kind of difficult is it's forced K-12 to rethink how it does its job. So for example, I heard a teacher say this, which is, if for your either assignment or for your project or for your assessment, if a student can use an AI to cheat and do it for them, you actually need to rethink the assessment. So for example, you're seeing on the higher ed side an increase in oral exams. There was a story about this in I believe it was the Financial Times or another publication very recently. Or you're seeing on the high school level more and more school districts thinking about doing what we call portfolio assessment. Doctor, it would look very much like probably when you defended your dissertation, where you effectively take a body of knowledge and defend it against experts and take questions and it's interrogative. And AI can't do that. And so one of the things, and again, I think about this me now as a new teacher, almost 20 years ago, how are we preparing educators to change around how they think of the model so that the AI actually can be a help and not a hindrance. Again, if it's simple, if the assignment is make a term paper, candidly, that probably you need to rethink that, because you and I both know that a Claude or a Gemini or a ChatGPT can do that really fast, and candidly, it might not be that much different than what I would have produced when I was 14. We have to think about what is another way that this student can show knowledge and the capacities that I think that the doctor's talking about, and also to learn how to use these tools in ways that are productive and actually can amplify their own intellectual power.
And ultimately can get them a job, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what you mentioned at the top, is that you want to equip them with the tools to work in these spaces. But at the same time, you know, we keep hearing this term blue collar tech, and like the idea that, yes, like we're going to see this huge wave of jobs that are going to be AI oriented, that ultimately may be replacing entry-level jobs. And so I understand the need to equip students with these tools, but do we inadvertently funnel them through a pipeline where they're going to be driven more towards these AI jobs and less towards knowledge-based careers?
The direction we're starting to move in is that work that we previously thought was not automatable, like white-collar cognitive work, things like legal services, finance and insurance jobs, programming and technical writing, etc. These things are actually now in danger of potentially being automated away, at least a large portion of their tasks. It's not so clear to me that knowledge work is necessarily like the safe place for, expanding employment moving forward, given this sort of technological shift that's going on.
It sounds like what you're saying is that, okay, if we know that the knowledge work won't necessarily be what's driving the economy, but for the people who are doing it very well, they are going to get compensated very well. They're going to be very highly sought after. Chike, do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like, is it possible that it's like, well, okay, we are going to start to value these other blue collar tech jobs in a different way?
The way I think about it is, and it's really helpful to hear my colleague talk about this. I think about AI in a couple ways for future workers. One, I think about it the same way I think about Microsoft Office, in the sense of if someone was hiring someone and you couldn't use Microsoft Office, they wouldn't hire you. Right now, AI and these tools, if you literally look at, right now Accenture in 2024 did a study where right now the average worker using AI saves 90 minutes a day. That's now, and we're at the very beginning stages. That's not, and that will compound, I imagine, over time. So that's a productivity gain that I can't leave on the table if I'm an employer looking to hire someone. So for anyone, just candidly, to be able to be floatable, survivable within the future marketplace, you have to have knowledge of these tools. So in some ways, I would argue that these are table stakes. And particularly when I think about Black and brown communities, we cannot have students leave without those table stakes of knowledge. I think that's one. I think two, what you hear the doctor talk about, and I maybe might say it more simply, which is what you find is AI is changing jobs, not necessarily at the occupation level, but at the task level. What you'll find is there are certain jobs that the job still exists, but the tasks within it, more of those tasks are being done. So the question is, okay, for those tasks that cannot, at least for the near future, be done by AI, how do we make workers and students really, really good at those? How do we make them to the right side of the curve so that, let's say there is a premium placed on the really, really good paralegal or the really, really good accountant, that we have more people who are good at those things that the AI cannot do? I would argue, if I was a teacher right now, I went to, I'm thinking about that spider graph from Anthropic that they put out probably earlier this year that showed what portion of what jobs could be done. I would look at what are the things that are not being done by AI, and my goal as a teacher is to make my students really, really good at those things. Then my number two job is to make them really, really sharp at how to use the tool, the AI that will be doing the other things. If I can do those two things, I put my students, particularly those from the most underserved communities, in a much better place. Let me say one last thing, which is one of the reasons why I think this has to be part of K-12 education is that particularly for your poorest students, this may be the only place where they're exposed to these technologies. Candidly, if you are from a community with means, if you are from a community with resources, you're going to figure out another way to learn about AI in ways that are safe and productive. But candidly, if you are, and I'm just using Boston, if you're from Roxbury, if you are from Dudley Square, if you are from Saugus, if you are from Pittsfield, a bunch of places where there are much more challenges, school may be the only place where you can get this knowledge and get this exposure. And so from my view, from an equity point of view, from just a math point of view, to get the most students with the most skills, this has to be part of K-12. And to me, the objectives are make students really good at the things the AI can't do, really, really good, because average won't cut it anymore. And then give them the table stakes skills for the AI that will be doing the other parts of those jobs.
One thing I want to double click on a little bit here is this notion of what AI cannot do and sort of what we should be shifting educational focus into to make sure that people can succeed in work. The things that AI currently can't do tends to be what's called the tacit side, so tacit skills. And so these are skills that humans can do, but that we can't quite articulate how they can do them. I think of technology as at a frontier where they keep getting increasingly better and better at doing these tacit skills. But regardless, there are skills that are so difficult and abstract, difficult to pin down, that humans have a unique knack of being able to do, that they haven't quite gotten all the way out to doing all of them yet, particularly nonverbal communication cues, these kinds of things, creativity, and complex manual skills. And so what we've seen is that these more tacit tasks, these more tacit skills, these are the ones that are growing in the more AI exposed occupations. And particularly what we're seeing in our work is creativity. That's actually a primary driver. And so, and which I think it's moving in the direction of maybe having a little bit of a theory and some predictions about what the future of work might look like. The challenge to me, and this is for education, maybe Chike, you could speak to this a little bit, is it's not clear to me that U.S. education is set up well to make people, in general, more creative, or to, target people towards becoming better at interpersonal skills. Certainly my experience in New Jersey going to public school wasn't that there was a curriculum that was in some sense pushing me to try and build these capacities. And so I don't quite know what it looks like to say, we're going to make a much more creative workforce. Unfortunately, I think that that's a tricky problem.
It's a great question. I say maybe two things. I think your instinct is right, which is I think it is the structure may not quite be fit for purpose in a couple of ways. I think one, to your point on that the skills that the AI can do and not do is changing on a regular basis. Agility is hard in this system, and I think we have to become more agile. When I say this system, not just K-12, but even higher ed, workforce, we have to become more agile. This is changing quarter to quarter. Again, if you look at just most states and how they do state standards in terms of students will be able to do X, Y, Z, that's looked at times twice a decade, where we probably need to get to something far more frequent to get a sense of what students need to be able to know. So I think that's one. I think two, one development that I do think gets to what the doctor is talking about is an increase in interest across states of political affiliation, across geography, in work-based experiential learning, from apprenticeships to externships, things like that. Because candidly, the big difference with a lot of those things that he just spoke about is you don't learn them from a book. You only really learn them by doing. Again, I always say this for those of us who are early in our careers and we did kind of white collar work, kind of learning how to be in a meeting. We all have been in a meeting, likely when we were younger, and we said something stupid. And hopefully someone pulled us aside and said, hey, don't say that again, just as a prime example. That is what work-based learning needs to look like, starting very young. I'm on the board of a foundation trying to get these experiences down in middle school. Because again, you don't learn that creativity, interpersonal skills, reading about it. You have to actually do it. And even at an institution like Harvard Business School.
I do want to look at BPS as an example, Boston Public Schools as an example, because the AI literacy program that's coming to that district is being achieved through $1 million public-private partnership with UMass Boston and the Paul English Applied AI Institute. Now, we know that this is just one instance of businesses being in on public education and helping shape these curriculums. So what are the ethical considerations, Kadeem, that we have to keep in mind when doing that, especially when it comes to potential recruitment?
There's another great case study that is to some degree historical, but it is ongoing as well. There is these sectoral job training programs that have been gaining prominence for being able to get people into high quality jobs who don't necessarily have college credentials. One program that I work with in particular called Year Up. And they're in most major cities. There's one in Boston. And what they do, and it sounds like it parallels what what Boston Public Schools is doing to some degree, but what they do is they partner with local companies. They base their curriculum on what it is that companies are actually demanding. They teach their curriculum in that targeted fashion. And then they also partner with these same companies to provide internships, which is half of their model. The students spend the first 6 months in classroom education and the last 6 months in an internship, where they're able to get some of this like work in practice. Like, I think one thing that can fail in the education system is actually not partnering with companies enough. And ultimately companies, I mean, they are going to be the primary drivers of the labor market. I mean, there are public sector jobs, of course, but companies are going to employ the majority of people. In that particular case of sectoral job training programs, where they seem to have these very large effects on earnings impacts for people that go through these programs, I think it's been an awesome sort of demonstration of how partnering with companies and getting them to sort of like be involved in the curriculum development can really be a successful outcome. There are heterogeneous impacts from the program, and people who tend to be at the bottom of the impacts, they disproportionately tend to be female, low SES, or low socioeconomic status, and Black. And so these are a number of historically disadvantaged groups that you might hope you could ultimately get the impacts higher, or make the impacts sort of equivalent to these other groups that are getting a lot out of the programs. And then the other piece from that paper, which is buried a bit in an appendix, is I think that there is potentially an understanding of what's going on there, which is the groups that tend to get the lower treatment effects are also the ones that disproportionately get kicked out of the program. And so this particular program, and this is extreme in the set of sectoral job training programs in how penal they are and how strict they are, but they're quite strict. They have these rules about attendance, these rules about dress code, etc. And the way it works is if you break these rules, you get what's called an infraction. If you get enough infractions, you quote unquote fire yourself and you get kicked out of the program. And so the groups that seem to have the lowest impacts are the ones that get kicked out of the program at higher rates. The place where I would like to push, and there's other research that's suggestive of this. There's a great paper by my PhD advisor and co-authors on schools that are more penal on students seem to accelerate the rate at which students end up in committing crimes later on. So if you have a school that is much more likely to give people detention, or much more likely to kick students out, if you happen to be in one of those schools, it seems to accelerate the likelihood of you ending up committing crimes. But in sort of alignment with that literature, I would be curious to see what happens if the program were to loosen its rules on what it does to kick people out, and if that could ultimately boost the earnings outcomes. But it's speculative. It's possible that what's going on is a screening mechanism. And the students that tend to be the ones that are dropping out are also the students that would give employers the biggest problems on the end of the program, and that it just would erode the ability for employers to have this relationship to this program. So it's untested, but it's a bit of a smoking gun.
Chike, I want to give you the last word, but I want to take what Kadeem said and funnel it into this question here, because we've talked about these literacy programs, and if they succeed exactly as they are designed, 15 years from now, will it leave Black and brown students with more power over technology, or will it just give them better chances to survive inside of someone else's system?
I think the answer is it's both. In the end, this is a question, in my view, of economic survival. If you do not have these skills, I do not know how you economically survive in this market. Talking to enough employers, this is becoming a table stakes set of skills. Secondly, does it actually increase power? I think one thing that's really interesting, and it's something I said recently to a few secretaries of labor across the states. One of the really interesting effects that you begin to see of AI, and I'm thinking less about the workforce, but more on entrepreneurship. So your colleague, Jeff Busgang, is a dear friend, and I admire his work very greatly. But what he posits is the barriers to entry for starting your own enterprise with AI will decrease, literally in terms of bodies needed, capital needed, things like that. And if you think about particularly underserved communities, whether it be communities of color, immigrants, things like that, you have a slightly higher propensity for entrepreneurship. And so one of the things that I hope will happen is that entrepreneurs, and we should think of entrepreneurs, in my view, the same way we think about other types of workers. We don't think about it that way from the world that I come from, but we should. I hope and I expect that we will have more folks coming from less resource communities who actually say, because I now understand these tools, I'm going to grab part of the value chain and start my own thing.
Well, maybe instead of becoming part of this workforce, today's students will be the ones helping create it. That's it for this episode of Rooted. Be sure to keep up with us on our social channels. And until next time, stay rooted, stay studious, and as always, stay tuned.